Good morning, good evening, good afternoon from wherever you are. It's a pleasure to be back and it's a pleasure to be having this conversation with you today. Today I'm going to talk about a topic actually that is part of a series of conversation but also part of a webinar that we'll be hosting on Friday, designing a robust outsourcing strategy for technical services within the pharmaceutical industry. This is a critical conversation that we need to have, and therefore then the essence of me having this particular video with you today is just to set the foundation and the benchmark of why we are having this conversation, why is it important at this particular moment in time, but also most importantly, how do we ensure that our outsourcing is done right, and how do we ensure that we meet those commitments, both from an industry perspective, where you as the company who is outsourcing and actually getting to contract a third party to support in delivering some of your technical services, how do you ensure that is done right? But also for the consultants, the technical service providers who are coming into the companies, engaging and providing solutions, the question that you keep asking yourself is, how do we ensure that I offer optimal services actually aligned to what the regulator expects, what the company expects, but also what is valuable for the continuity of my business venture as a technical service provider within the industry? And that is a critical piece and a critical start of our conversation at this particular moment in time. So one of the key things that we look at in this particular context is to establish that when we're talking about designing a robust outsourcing strategy, we have to start from the understanding that outsourcing is a key component, and it has been in the pharmaceutical industry from time immemorial. Whether you look at it in terms of the technical clinical research organizations offering their support in research and development, looking at contract manufacturing where alternative companies are now specializing in manufacturing only, and then somebody handles the marketing, distribution and logistical side, or even when you go to the last mile distribution where somebody will support the marketing authorization, which is registration of medicines in different markets, or the post-market surveillance and pharmacovigilance support and oversight, which can also be a key function. And the last bit is the patient access and the patient monitoring when the product is being used in clinical setting, whether in clinical research, whether in real world evidence, when we're generating now the evidence that we need to get to support our intervention, whether as a company, as an outsourced service provider, or whatever that scope of it would look like. And pharma and the life science industry generally is a technical domain, and being a technical domain, then it means there are certain stringent requirements that will be put in place, but there's also need for substance and actually subject matter expertise in whatever service that you're offering within the industry. And that would range from the research and development to the last mile delivery of the product. We either deal with healthcare professionals, or we deal with quality specialists, or deal with engineers and technical experts who might understand the nuances around the domain of work that they are doing. So when you're coming in and saying you as a company, I'm looking at it from the perspective of company for a start, you're designing your outsourcing strategy. The key question that you'll definitely be asking yourself is, why do I need to outsource? At the moment, and especially within the African continent and in Kenya specifically, when I look at it at the moment, the reason as to why we are considering outsourcing is to a level that most of the regulatory requirements that are coming up are becoming substantial. And therefore then, when these additional regulatory requirements and regulatory controls come in place, it will demand of you as a company to put in place certain measures to employ a certain number of people depending on the function that you need to perform. These come with financial obligations and financial costs that are going to be catered for, and therefore then you need to evaluate and say, do I have the financial muscle to pay for a full-time employee or to full-time employees in the company to meet these obligations? And if not, how do I get a third-party service provider who can actually offer these services at a fraction of that cost to ensure there's viability in the long term? And two, the other consideration is always the workload that would be associated with it. And this is a critical piece, because then when you are setting up your system, you need to understand what is the probable workload. And I would say when you're setting up initially, the substantial workload, because probably these departments were not fully designed and fully operationalized. So you need somebody to set up the structures for that to happen. But then ultimately beyond that, depending on the number of products you have in your portfolio, there might be limited level of engagement when you look at it from pharmacovigilance, post-market surveillance and related work, or even regulatory registration in terms of managing the pipeline, whatever it is that you need to have in the company. So you look at workload, you look at the cost, but most importantly, the third piece that you look at, and I think it's critical for us to consider, is what level of expertise can I get in the market, and how can I use that to help me unlock value within that ecosystem? Sometimes recruiting somebody limits you to their expertise depending on their horizon, but outsourcing to a company, you're attracting the best of the best, but also getting a pool of experts, because most consultancies do not only work as individuals, they work as consortiums of technical experts working within a vehicle, and therefore then you're getting somebody's 15 years, 30 years of experience, but also getting somebody's operational nuance and agility as a 3-year-old experienced technical expert within that domain. That gives you the bundled package of solution that you're hoping for. So it's a critical thing that you need to look at. For consultants, you need to understand, okay, how do I ensure that I engage appropriately? How do I get my services to speak to the needs of the client? But also, how do I scope that work? These are key nuances that we need to understand in outsourcing, both from a service provider, but also both from the service contractor level. And the subsequent piece is designing a robust outsourcing strategy is not only for business value, but it's also for the technical and regulatory risk that comes with it. And this is a critical thing that I would say most of us are not looking at. I've had conversations in some of the engagements where somebody calls me and they're asking, oh, I need you to help me do my PV support services and everything. Can you just give me your quote and then we'll confirm and agree? I would be keen to do that if I'm looking at it in terms of a point of just making money. But on the other end, you need to understand that when I'm doing that to make the money, the question is, do I understand your need? Do I understand the systems? And therefore, how do we ensure that we scope your systems right, design a solution that speaks to your needs, but most importantly, addresses the key fundamentals of why with this industry we have these regulatory requirements. That is to protect the public, to ensure the quality of the products that we're offering, and therefore to improve well-being and productivity of individuals who are using the solution that we're presenting in the market. Those are key fundamentals that we need to understand and we need to work with. So therefore then, when you look at designing a robust outsourcing strategy, the question you need to ask yourself, why now? There's a lot of requirements that are coming in. The capital outlays that might come in with some of these requirements are substantial, and therefore you need to mitigate your financial and economic cost as a business. On the other end, you need to also ensure that you're getting the best talent. And I would say, from the work we've been doing with African Pharmaceutical Network, we have technical expertise, but it's not technical expertise that is refined and actually optimized for the different solutions that we're having. And that is the next level of growth in the industry, where people are packaging their solutions, but also structuring them to give them format and structure to be able to deliver value for the company. And therefore then, as a person who is outsourcing your services, this is how you need to evaluate the people who are coming in. Do they have the expertise? Do they have the refined nuance to understand what needs to apply? Or are you looking at a tick box? Because then the tick box has its own implications and risks to you as a service provider, as a company, but also then in the long-term value in terms of your brand reputation, the value that you bring into the market, and viability to sustain your operations long-term. So those are key things that you need to look at. When we look at it now for the work that we're doing, and actually the webinar that we'll be having on Friday, this is a session that we created specifically to look at it from start to end. When you start determining the need and evaluation as a company level, what do I look for? How do I look for them? How do I structure my contractual engagement with the probable client that I'm going to engage? What are the key discussions that you need to have with that licensee before they come on board? How do you go through the project of contracting? But then after the contracting, what documentation must be there? Because that, you look at it now, when you look at the quality management system, regulators will request for such information to confirm that somebody who is doing this is officially contracted and the documentation proving that is already in place. And then we'll go to the contractor and establish what are the key considerations they need to put in place. How do you design your team to ensure that you're meeting the client obligations and demands? But then also, how do you design a system that is a driving growth and continuous improvement? Because in outsourcing, it's not only about getting the service and closing that contract, but it's about ensuring you're building systems, driving capability development, and most importantly, ensuring continuity and reliability of that system. Get to engage with us. Join us for our session that will be coming on Wednesday at 3 p.m. Kenyan time, so that we can have a 2-hour conversation, 2-hour training, build you with the skills, and therefore then we move to the next level beyond being reactive to what the regulator wants, but to setting systems that are robust and efficient in getting our values. If you love the conversation, you love engaging with us, subscribe to the channel, shoot us an email, contact us. Let's build the industry as we hope in a better way, as we ensure that everybody has reliable access to safe, effective, and quality medicines. Thank you and have a good one.